welcome to Pod Have Mercy.
Well, thanks for being with us today. We're actually getting back in the groove. The whole podcast is getting back in the groove. We've done some kind of one-offs here and there, but this is the first time you and I have been back together.
I know.
Welcome back.
And we have Dr. Ashley Boggan. You need to introduce yourself first, because you're going to do a better job. I mean, I have this long, written up, fancy thing about how smart you are and how wonderful you are and all the things you've done. But I think people would rather hear you talk about all the wonderful things that you've done than me talk about all the wonderful things that you've done.
Gosh.
I'm kidding. Just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll go from there.
I'm Dr. Ashley Boggan. I am a laywoman within the United Methodist Church, and I serve as the General Secretary for the General Commission on Archives and History, which I always like to say is a really nerdy, kind of fancy way of saying that I'm just a big history geek, and I love being surrounded by history and finding ways to make it not only interesting, but fully relevant for current United Methodists and non-United Methodists.
Well, that's great. Boggan. I said Boggan. Sorry. Boggan like noggin, Boggan as in Hogan.
Yes, Boggan.
All right, good. Now, my understanding is you are the daughter of two United Methodist pastors. Is that right?
I am. Both my parents were ordained clergy. My mom was a deacon. My dad was an elder, and they served in the Arkansas Conference.
So you ended up in this tribe. You were born into the tribe.
Yes.
Conceived.
I think even in the womb, right? I was going to choir camp and stuff with my mother.
And you were singing Charles Wesley.
I guess so.
You know how they have those babies that they have the Mozart tunes when women are pregnant? You can play the Mozart tunes. Your parents had Charles Wesley.
Can it be?
So you are a historian. Like, I have to ask, since I was a history major in college, how many people walk up to you knowing that you're the historian for the United Methodist Church and say, "Hey, I was a history major"?
Quite a few, and that's one of my favorite things, because I feel like, especially in the last probably 10, 15 years, history majors aren't that common anymore. So I love knowing that we're still out there, that there are people who are interested in investing in the future of history.
I know, but I'm going to tell you something, and you probably won't take it well, but it was for me. When my wife and I dated in college, she was a business major, and I was a history major, and sometimes she would walk over and meet me in the history department or the history building, and she didn't like to go in it because she said it reminded her of the cantina from Star Wars. She said everybody in there was a little strange.
Yeah, those are my people.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking. That was awesome. So you talk about what you do as the ministry of memory, and you describe it as an act of your faith. What does that mean?
For me, I come to my faith, I work on my faith, wrestle with it all through this historical lens. So whenever I'm trying to discern something that's going on in my life, I turn to history books. And so for me personally, I think that's one of the ministry components of it. But kind of outside of myself, the ministry of memory is really that notion that running an archive and doing the work of promoting our history is doing the work of identity formation. We house the records which record the memory of what it's meant to be United Methodist, Wesleyan, throughout time. And so us being able to access that and tap into it and share it is the ministry that Archives and History does. So it's tapping into those memories and helping people either hear them for the first time or remember them once again or learn from them and take them into the future. That is the ministry component that we do.
That's great. I moved here from Houston 13 years ago from St. Simon's Island, Georgia.
Yeah.
So you've been to the History Museum there on the island at Epworth?
Yes. Yes.
And I'm sure
Yes,
you've
and
been
there's
out.
that big John Wesley statue out front.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And the big, was it the wax figure of Arthur J. Moore? Or I think he's in there. Yeah, that's kind of scary. But you've also been to Fort Frederica and out there where John Wesley did ministry, where he almost got stabbed with a fork, I think, by some lady or something like that. Did you do the tour and you had to learn all those little details?
I've never done an official tour. I've done my own kind of unofficial tour,
Yeah.
and there's always a tree that either John or Charles preached under, and I may have taken a piece of its bark.
There you go. Yeah.
So it's that part of the United States is just so special because it is the only part that John, stepped foot on, and so doing the Savannah tour, Savannah, Georgia, and Fort Frederica, it's just so cool. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting for people who don't know. John Wesley didn't really like it down there, and in fairness, they didn't really like him. So he was not the most sociable guy. Anyway.
No, he wasn't. He both loved making rules and breaking rules. He was very confusing that way.
Yeah, that is confusing. That sounds like you. Well, Matt's the breaking rule guy.
I have that Wesley deep in me.
Yeah. There you go.
So, what's the difference between a church that remembers and where a lot of churches find themselves, and we've seen this before, they're just nostalgic? What's the difference between nostalgia and remembrance?
Nostalgia oftentimes is a rose-colored glasses understanding of what we assume happened a while ago, whether we were there for it or not. Right? So nostalgia is this idea that, 60 years ago it was so much better. This false notion that the best times are behind us. And for me, history is a more honest assessment. It looks at, what happened 60 years ago or 160 years ago and says, okay, right, like here are the spaces and places that we can celebrate. And here are the spaces and places where maybe we did some harm or maybe we weren't at our best. It's a more honest accounting of where we've been. And for me, history is more useful than nostalgia because history can shape current conversations and current moments that can make us better in the future, whereas nostalgia is just kind of always pulling you back.
Yeah.
And so you don't really want to move forward because the past seems so much better than our present or future. So history is actually this lens I use to look at the future by examining the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful that we've done in the past in order to ensure that we have the brightest future ahead of us.
Yeah. That's interesting because a part of what I studied in my PhD was memory, and often nostalgia can be something that we almost put rose-colored glasses on, and memory seems to be something that can be a type of reckoning or a type of way of learning. It's where we get wisdom often, where we learn. So it seems that's the kind of memory that you're interested in.
Yes, exactly.
And if you've ever been in any church, you've probably heard the stories of how great it was at some particular time with some particular pastor, and they are always wanting to go back to the good old days. Fill in the blank. Like the greatest pastor was there from 1970 to 1975, and they'll still say his name. Leroy Huntsman. I remember Pastor
That's when
Leroy.
Jesus was here.
I remember Pastor Leroy. Remember the church of Pastor Leroy? I'm thinking that was 50 years ago,
Lord.
60 years ago. But it's happened. We still run up against that on a regular basis. Now I am fascinated by this. I'm assuming this is a word you made up, but John Wesley once wrote, and I bet most Methodists don't know this, I submitted to be more vile. Now, Matt's going to love this.
I know that quote.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That made me, when I read that in seminary, I was like, oh, snap.
That's what converted you to Methodism.
Yeah, wasn't that Whitefield, though, that really encouraged him to preach in a much more vile way? It's like not just
preach in the fields, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, submitted to be more vile. I don't think most people even know what that means. But what's the history of that? I think you wrote a book about this, so you might be able to
It's just new
educate
cuss
people
words.
on what this means about being more vile and what the lesson might be for us, I don't know, in the days where we find ourselves.
Of course. So, yeah, John Wesley said the quote on April 2nd, 1739. And for me, that marks the true, like, that is the date, if I had to say a date, when the movement of the people called Methodists truly begins, is with this submission to be more vile. So, a little bit of backstory.
Yeah.
John Wesley, during this time in his life, was really kind of going through a spiritual crisis. Most of his adulthood was kind of a spiritual crisis. But he's trying to figure out his call to ministry and really what his extraordinary call, as he would say it was, his extraordinary call to ministry was. And, you know, he tried kind of the youth ministry thing with Oxford. He tried the missionary thing with Georgia. He dabbled in pulpit ministry when he essentially interned with his father. But none of it was fitting what he believed to be an extraordinary call. And so, Christmas 1738, the formerly Holy Club, that kind of original group of misfits from Oxford University, get back together in London at a pub, and they make a pact that they are going to launch a renewal movement within the Church of England. And they're essentially going to try to do what they did at Oxford University, but for the entire Church of England. So they make this pact, and then all the other preachers go back to their pulpits. But John Wesley was a fellow at Lincoln College during this time, so he didn't have a pulpit to go to. And so he just made this pact, and he's like, I don't know where to go. And so fast forward a couple months, George Whitefield was in the town of Bristol. And Bristol was like a slimy, grungy town. It would be one of the birth centers for the Industrial Revolution. It was the main port of the Atlantic slave trade. It was built to hold about 5,000 people, and because of changes in industry, was holding 40,000 people inside its walls. And this is 1739, right? So like no modern waste management systems or sanitation systems. So, and it's surrounded by coal mines. So when you read the journals of people who are talking about Bristol, they talk about like how you can feel the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like it's like muggy and dirty, so you can feel it. So George Whitefield is in Bristol. And, you know, a lot of preachers like to exaggerate how many sermons I feel like they give a week. It's kind of like, you know, how big was your fish?
Yeah.
And allegedly, George Whitefield was giving 40 sermons a week.
Pump the brakes, George. Wow.
Right? Like even if half of that's true, even if a quarter of that's true, that's too many. So he gets tired and he starts writing to his friends who he made this pact with to come and help him out. And he first writes to Charles Wesley, and Charles essentially says, why would I ever go to Bristol? Have you been to Bristol? It's really gross down there. And John Wesley was not his second, third, or fourth choice, but his last resort. And so he wrote to John Wesley this letter asking John to come to Bristol and see what God has enabled him to plant. So John goes to Bristol after, you know, casting lots and opening scripture and all the things that he always did before making any decision. And he shows up on March 31st, 1739, and realizes that George kind of left out a major part of what he'd been doing in Bristol, which was field preaching. And field preaching was against the rules or the standards of decorum within the Church of England. So John Wesley had already been getting in trouble for a couple of years for how radical his message was of God's all-encompassing love for everybody. And so here he is in Bristol. He sees George Whitefield preaching in the fields, and he sees the change in countenance that people have when they hear that they are worthy of God's love for the first time in their life. Because they're preaching to people who would not have been welcomed inside the Anglican parish on Sunday morning. Yeah. Either because they didn't have the Sunday morning off from their jobs, or they were too dirty, or they didn't have the right clothes, or they didn't have the ability to get to church. So these are largely coal miners. These are the poor, the illiterate, the orphaned, the widowed, that are hearing that they too are worthy of God's love. And they're hearing this for the first time. So John sees George bringing this message and sees the change in people and recognizes that God is in this space also. And so a couple of days later, that's when he writes in his journal that he submitted to be more vile and preached in the fields. He submitted to be more vile and took that message of God's love outside the church walls where it was deemed appropriate to have, and took it to that place that was deemed inappropriate. So he takes it to this not only kind of space that probably he considered vile, being outside the walls of the church, but to people that, quote unquote, proper Anglicans would have considered vile. And so it's just one of those moments, though, that if you keep reading John's journal after this, he stays in Bristol for, I think it's about 9 months. And that's where you finally start to see his him figure out his call and actually begin to find some joy in his faith. And so that's, for me, like, that is kind of when the movement of people called Methodist begins, because up until that point, it was John trying to figure out, you know, where are we going to go? What's going to be our thing? Turns out our thing is being more vile.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, the vile means a little bit different than what people might.
Yeah, it seems like in theological language, it's solidarity. It's a movement towards the margins. It's the lack of and the loss of reputation. It's the movement towards the boundaries. You know, the exit.
Yeah, it's that willingness to take the love of God to anyone, anywhere, at any time, no matter what the rules of an institution say, no matter the repercussions to your own reputation. It's putting that expanding the love of God above anything and everything else, even if it means that you're going to be considered vile or that you might have to do quote unquote vile things.
But Methodists have not always kept that. I think your argument is that we traded that vile tality for respectability.
Yes.
And what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
So when we became a separate denomination, when we became the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1784, we lost the privilege of being a renewal movement inside of an established institution that was allowed to kind of challenge, bend, and break rules. Yeah. And instead, we became this institution that had to make rules. And even though we were existing in a newly formed nation where we could bend and break rules, we chose not to. And that was out of this desire to be respected, to gain members, to gain status, and to gain prominence. So one of the best ways to kind of look at this loss of vitality is when it comes to race. So John Wesley was staunchly anti-slavery his entire life. His last letter before he dies is written to the British Methodist abolitionist William Wilberforce, and asking him to carry on the Methodist stance against
go further,
slavery.
Go further than I could. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. That's a great letter.
With the Methodist Episcopal Church, when that is established in 1784, we hold that anti-slavery stance initially. Right? You could not be a Methodist in good standing and be an enslaver. But that stance lasted 3 months.
Holy moly.
But we were principle. We were standing on principle.
And it lasts only 3 months because Methodism was strongest kind of in that mid-Atlantic region, which would eventually become kind of the border
People
states.
Wouldn't tithe to that.
Yeah, right? And
wow.
Methodism was growing fastest throughout the South. And so we began making compromises with our own sense of ethics and morality around race in order to accommodate more members. And so in order to allow enslavers to join, or in order to not tick off persons who were already members and happened to be enslavers, we began to water down that anti-slavery stance to where eventually by 1808, it was up to the annual conference whether or not you could be an enslaver and be a Methodist in good standing.
Wow.
And that's just one of the ways that we kind of lost that vitality, right? That willingness to push the boundaries of society, or to be good people who break bad rules.
Yeah,
That's right.
I thought it was interesting that Wesley was so anti-slavery, and then we Methodists, and I guess Baptists too in the South, I mean, we went to war to uphold slavery in the South.
Yeah.
It seems like that within Methodism, within the Anglican Communion in England, was almost like the Franciscans in the Catholic Church, that it was a reform movement that was working within to change some things, and that the frontier and this new country kind of took some of that out, and there's so many denominations and religions, being formed in that space and time in the late 1700s within America, and so that it was kind of a race to, who is going to fill your churches, you know, and so it seems like so much was lost in that. You go from this Wilberforce, Clapham sect folks that are changing society in England to, what do you make up about that? Was it about not offending people that had money? Was it about the changing dynamics of just an environment? Like what was that about? How did those compromises get made?
So I think a lot of it had to do with, so a lot of it was done under the direction of Bishop Francis Asbury. And I mean, when you read Asbury's journal, you see that he was really conflicted around a lot of this, because he knew the importance of maintaining anti-slavery stances. And yet he also held himself personally responsible for the safety of his circuit riders, and his members, the members of the Methodist movement or the Methodist Episcopal Church. And so what we start to see, especially as Methodists become more numerous in the 1780s, and after they become an established institution, is they are not only, circuit riders are being thrown in jail, they're being murdered, or they're being harassed. And so I don't want to let Asbury off the hook, because I think he made a bad choice, but I do think that is one of the things that he was doing, at least when it came to race, was trying to ensure the safety of his circuit riders. And unfortunately for Asbury, that meant that he chose the safety of white bodies over the safety of black bodies.
Wow.
And that's a tension that we have to name and hold ourselves accountable for.
Wow.
But I would say that that's probably the main impetus, if I had to think about it, within that framework from 1784 to about 1800, 1803. I think from there, when Methodism starts to gain more members, and as circuit riders start to settle down and marry a little bit, it shifts a little bit more to being more respectable, to gaining more membership and status within a community. But I think early on, I mean, you had circuit riders that were riding 300, 400-mile circuits, and were constantly exposed not only to natural elements, but to different people. And if you heard that Methodists were anti-slavery and you see a Methodist circuit rider, that is, if you are a pro-slavery person, you might have some sort of physical reaction to that. And so that is what I would say led to it early on, was kind of protecting circuit riders. But later on, it becomes more about respectability and power and money.
What's interesting to me is, the Methodist movement, our polity, a lot of our things align with the birth of the United States of America. And so you have a lot of parallels on our governance. And I think what you're talking about here too are decisions that were made in some ways culturally, contextually, historically, like the framers of the Constitution. They had to wrestle with this exact same thing. When you talk about, people are born with inalienable rights, they had to make their own compromises within their constitutional Congress to include the southern states and the northern states. You had the same thing going on where decisions were made that I think, it's important, again, as a history person, you have to keep those things alive and remember those. And I think we're going through this little moment in our country right now where, like, we don't want to look at some of the bad things that we did. We don't want to be reminded of some of the bad things that our ancestors did, and I think that's unfortunate because museums and stories and histories, you're going to repeat the same thing. You're going to end up making the same mistakes if you don't learn from those things.
Yeah. I mean, the wonderful Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme.
It rhymes.
Yep. And it
And
rhymes.
unless you're familiar with the poem, if I can try to keep that metaphor going, you're going to reinvent it. I don't know. So Archives and History, we just produced a really wonderful series called From Crown to Conferencing that looks at Methodism kind of at the birth of the United States and looks at how Methodists were kind of integrated into the politics at the founding of the nation. So I cannot recommend that source enough because it goes into exactly what you're talking about of, we were dealing with a lot of the same questions, just through slightly different lenses. And for me, one of the most fascinating ways to look at American history is to look at it through American religious history or Methodist history, because it gives you that, you see that we do the same trends, just maybe a decade off.
That's interesting.
And so you can really kind of get a better understanding, or at least a different understanding of how varied the conversations were and how complex some of the problems were that have shaped who we are as a nation or as a denomination.
Yeah. It's also interesting, too, is that like the fetish kind of interest we have within church growth within or maybe just growth within America, right, is that you have a group that has holding strong principles. Asbury holding these deeply strong principles. And then within 6 months, he's bishoping a conference that overturns the principles he says that he holds for the sake of church growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then part of that, I'm sure, part of that reasoning is, well, we can still reach all these more people. We can reach the slave to come to Christ because, which is then just this justification that sells our soul down the river. And we're still paying that price.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Aye.
Yeah, for sure.
So, speaking of the birth of our country, this is the 250th year. Right, Jeff?
That's right.
And do you know what that word is? 250th?
Bison sequus.
Semiquintian something sippin ramerinentennial.
Sounds like you're speaking in tongues now.
I don't know who
you have
comes
an
up.
interpretation.
I don't know who comes up with those words, but yeah. So John Wesley was not actually in favor of the American Revolution. Makes sense because he was a loyal subject to the king, and he never left the Church of England. But he wrote this calm address to our American colonies. How did that sit with American Methodists?
Oh, not very well. So, and I think I should clarify. So, a lot of when the American Revolution begins, Francis Asbury is the only British-born Methodist clergy who stays in what would soon become the United States. All of the other clergy that Wesley had sent over go back home. And that's largely because, one, they didn't want to be held prisoners of war, and two, I can't say if they didn't agree with the revolution, but they didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
So they go back home, and Asbury goes into hiding for a few years. And I mean, your average Methodist during that time, I mean, you probably would have some that were staunchly patriotic and some that were staunchly for the crown. Like they're going to be a mixed bag, as we are on everything. But when we look at some of the results, like when you look at kind of this founding of the new nation alongside the founding of a new denomination, you see that they hold some of the same ideals in place, right? Like this notion of democracy, right? John Wesley sent over folks in 1784 with explicit instructions to make Francis Asbury a general superintendent, to just name him that. And Francis Asbury says, ho ho, you know what's not going to fly here is orders from a British dude. So instead, we are going to, I will put my name up, but I have to be elected. And so I think that there are some of the same ideals, but, you know, many Methodists back then were probably a mixed bag a little bit. Those who stayed, at least.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think we've had these moments in our history where, you know, I think you said one time, history does not tell us what decision to make, but it does offer a warning. And like in his address then, you know, he gave warnings to them. And I'm wondering if any of those things still resonate today, or any of the lessons or any of the warnings that we can carry forward into these days in which we find ourselves. Any of those land in 2026, like, you know, he talked about false liberty and propaganda and rupture and moral decay and a lot of other things as he was writing to the colonies.
Yes. Yeah, I do think they do. And this is what I think earlier this summer, May or June, I wrote a play on his address, and I called it A Not So Calm Address to American Methodists in 2026. And it was really kind of going at the question that you're asking of, you know, John Wesley wrote this thing 250 years ago, kind of essentially saying, you know, bow down to the empire. You know, there's lots of propaganda out there that's trying to sway you one way or another. There's lots of forces trying to divide us. Like, just get over it and just stay loyal to the crown. And so it took a few readings of the Calm Address to find where we could pull some lessons, because I don't think we should bow down to empire. Yeah. But I do think that those lessons of, you know, be aware of the propaganda that is out there. Be aware of how people are spinning certain stories to produce a certain end. That is very much a lesson that we can still take. Be aware of people whose pure intent is to sow division, right? That, especially today, is definitely a lesson that we can take away. And I think in my not so calm address, I encourage us to actually, you know, stand up against empire. Right, and I think that's what Wesley would do if he were alive in 2026, living as an American citizen. I think he would be on the front page of the New York Times probably every day for doing something that was considered "quote unquote" vile, right? Of calling out the injustice of our immigration system. He would be calling to defund ICE. He would be calling against the erroneous wars that are going on.
Healthcare.
You know, so. For healthcare, yes, healthcare for all, education for all. Like he would be, he and probably like AOC would have a running ticket together. I don't know, but
there, I mean, the hub of that for me, or the heart of that for me, is for social transformation. That he understood the kingdom of God not as something that we were going to when we die only, but something that we are to work for here. And that injustice was a spiritual issue, not a political issue, right?
Exactly.
And so that the interest he had, whether it was with the miners or with you know, SPCA and the animals. It was about injustice that was happening in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's what draws me to Methodism, is that impulse that says, wait a minute, there's a world that God loves and something's wrong and we should do something about that. Right? Yeah. You said it's hard to be Methodist and not be socially progressive. What does that mean?
Well, I do think that, so in Wesley's eyes, everyone's equal. And so many of the ways that our society is structured, specifically here in the United States, encourage inequality or unequal access or unequitable access to things. And there's a way to look at, being socially progressive as trying to remove some of that inequality or inequity that's inherent in certain systems. And so when we look at, historically speaking, when we look at like who are the people that carried on that quote unquote vile spirit of John Wesley, and they're always going to be the people who stood up to unfair laws. So I'm thinking, Frederick Douglass was Methodist.
Yeah.
Sojourner Truth was Methodist, right? When we start to get into like women's suffrage, Frances Willard, Anna Howard Shaw, Ida B. Wells, all of these people who fought in like social systemic injustice were Methodist. And so I think today we cling onto political categories and terms in a way that's just doing that stuff of sowing division and trying to label people in order to dismiss them. But I mean, for me, if you actually read our social principles, if you read our theology, if you take our baptismal vows that say, that we're gonna stamp out injustice, evil, and oppression in any way, shape, and form it presents itself. I don't see how you can take those vows and then enter society or the political realm in a way that
It's screwing people over.
That reinforces inequities.
Yeah.
Or that privileges certain people over others because of the color of their skin, the status of their citizenship, or the money in their bank account.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I just think, which makes me realize that once we made that compromise early on, that said really what we're after is getting as many people here so that we can have a viable operation, and we're willing then to conform or to let go of some of our values to have a larger piece of the pie. We've already it's hard to reclaim a prophetic space when you've already made the compromise not to be prophetic so that you can be viable, right?
Yeah.
Viable by your own strength, though.
Yeah, but I mean, I would also say that, one of the advantages, if we can call it an advantage, one of the unfortunate advantages, I don't know. One of the advantages of kind of this loss of vitality and this chasing after respectability is that we were really successful in it. By the 1950s, there are more Methodist churches than there are post offices in the United States, right? Methodists were and still are advisors to presidents and CEOs and global missionaries. We have achieved respectability and status. The question that I bring to the United Methodist Church now is, so what are we going to do with it? Right? Are we going to hold this space of respectability and maintain this kind of middle road? Oh, we don't want to anger anybody on the left or the right, and so we're just going to keep this middle point. Or are we going to reclaim our roots and actually use the status that we've gained to be more vile, right? To shake up the system, to argue for equitable healthcare for all, and we've done some of that. I think it was 2012 when the Affordable Health Care Act was passed. Nancy Pelosi thanked the United Methodist Church from the floor of Congress for its involvement in getting that passed. So we do that in certain ways. We aren't amplifying that we're doing it.
Yes.
And that we're doing it because of our theology and because of who we are.
That's right. That's good.
All right, before we jump off religion and politics, what are your thoughts on Christian nationalism?
Up or down? Just one word answer.
For or against? Well, we've talked about that before here on the podcast, but I'm just, as a historian, is Christian nationalism a new thing? All of a sudden, this is new, or is this
no?
Is this a recurrence?
It is a recurrence that goes back terrifyingly far, probably all the way to Constantine, right? In terms
Lord.
of Christianity and nationhood.
Wow.
This. And what I would say is this is one of those spaces that the United Methodist Church needs to do an honest accounting of our own past. I did a report for the Council of Bishops this past spring on the jurisdictional system. And, it was essentially just kind of looking at from 1911 to 1921, there were various committees, of course, that tried to figure out a new structure for the church. And reading their notes, my assumption about the jurisdictional system is that it's a racist system. But in reading those notes, I also learned of the Christian nationalistic language inherent in the conversations.
Wow.
And so I really believe that this is one of those social sins that we need to hold ourselves accountable for being complicit in the early 20th century. We used Christian nationalistic language in the 1910s and 20s. How do we hold ourselves accountable to that today so that we don't repeat it and can do better and know how to call out the system that we were complicit in 100 years ago? But yes, overall, Christian nationalism bad.
Christian nationalism bad. One of my professors when I was at Candler 127 years ago was Bishop James Thomas, who was one of the, Central Conference bishops. And that's another thing I don't think a lot of Methodists in the pews today know of the history of the jurisdictional conferences, which we have, Southeast, South Central, North Central, Northeast, and Pacific. Those jurisdictional conferences are divided up, but those were done for the white folk. And then all the black folk were put in one central conference.
No matter where they were.
And
there was an annual conference that went from Mississippi to Montana, a singular annual conference in the central jurisdiction. And
then we did away with that. I don't remember what decade.
In 68.
68. I think
became United Methodist, right?
When we became United Methodist.
Yeah. I just think, again, going back to the history, there are a lot of things that we struggle with nowadays that we planted the seeds and the trees, grew, even though we hit them in the back part of the property. They're still there, and they still bear fruit sometimes, and sometimes give birth to new trees. But I don't know. What's now as we're thinking about this is going to probably only be interesting for people who are like deep in Methodist weeds. But as we go forward with this sort of new reorganizational kind of identity because we are a global church. We have as many United Methodists outside the United States as we have inside the United States. And it's always been an American denomination exported. And so all of the African United Methodist brothers and sisters really are kind of second-tier citizens in the American United Methodist denomination. But we've changed that. We are realigning, reorganizing our entire denomination to become a global church where now they have their equal status. But that puts the United States of America, if you will, now in our own central regional type conference. What does that mean for these old jurisdictions and things like that? What do you think? Do those things go away, or because they're rooted in a uniquely American experience?
Yeah.
I think really to protect the power and to protect cultural issues around the South versus the North identity. Yeah.
This is a place in a space where these conversations are happening kind of all over within the bureaucratic spaces of the UMC, right? Do we keep jurisdictions? Do we not? And why not? And why so? I don't have an answer to whether or not we should keep them, but I do have kind of cautions of if they remain, the goal of regionalization was to create a more equitable structure for, so that we don't have U.S. and non-U.S. Methodists, United Methodists. Instead, we are all United Methodists who live in different parts of the world. If the U.S. Regional Conference maintains jurisdictional structures, then we're still structured differently than elsewhere. So I either think you have to expand jurisdictions into other regional conferences, which I believe expanding a system that was inherently created for racist reasons is not the most Christian thing to do.
Don't we call that colonization?
We call it. We're good at exporting bad stuff.
Really great.
We're just here to help.
Yeah.
And for one of the main justifications for keeping jurisdictions within the U.S. Regional Conference is it's our best way of ensuring a wide representation, a diverse representation of the episcopacy within the American context. And yes, I understand that. But the United Methodist Church is the only Methodist denomination that does not elect its bishops connectionally at General Conference. We used to. Before 1939, that's where we elected bishops, was at General Conference. The U.S. Regional Conference is also the only one that does it kind of at the jurisdictional level instead of at a larger central conference or now regional conference level. And I like to believe and hope and have faith, maybe it's naive faith and hope, that we would still be able to elect a diverse range of episcopal representation within the U.S. without the jurisdictional system. I think there are other ways to ensure that aren't the jurisdictional system. But all I can do is just point out the spaces and places that we've learned from our past and how we compare to other historically Methodist and Wesleyan denominations. But we are unique in those spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's, it was created in a way. I was always told, being originally from Georgia, it was started because in the South they said we don't want no damn Yankee bishop down here, which was another way of saying we don't want anybody that's going to mess around with our way of thinking and our culture and our context. And a lot of that was racial. It was a lot of racial stuff. But I think that, going forward, that's the thing that I wonder. We've talked about the United Methodist Church being a big table rather than a big tent, and there's a seat for everyone. And that whether you are more traditional in your understanding of marriage, for example, or more progressive, that there could be a place and a space for everyone. And we operate under that here in Chapwood. And that's as you said, it's a lot easier to tack one way or the other than to try to bring everyone together. Like you said, the middle, I do think there's some value to the middle way, the via media, theologically, and trying to help people from both sides to sort of stretch instead of one side always thinking that they must win the day. And that's going to be, as a United States denomination that lost 20% of what you would consider the more conservative Methodists, does now our church become homogeneous, only looking like, say, the Pacific jurisdiction, right? Or does it embrace the beauty of the church exists? So those are questions I think that Methodists in the pews are going to continue to ask, and I think probably at a broader level too, it needs to be something that we continue to wrestle with. I mean, if we say we are a church of a big table, but then we don't let some of the people in the family sit at the table, you get to go to the kiddie table.
Of course.
And, historically speaking, even within John Wesley's Methodist movement, there was division, right? There were the Calvinist Methodists and the Arminian Methodists, right? There was George Whitfield's group and then John Wesley's group. And when John Wesley holds the first conference in 1744, nobody shows up because nobody agreed with him. And so there's always been disagreement, I think, theologically.
Yeah.
There was between John and George, there was between John and Charles. When we get to the American context, there was between Bishop Asbury and Bishop Coke. And our first general conference of the MEC in 1792, two groups get up and walk out and form a different denomination. In the first 50 years of our existence, 12 denominations are formed out of the Methodist Episcopal
We are
Church.
really good at starting new denominations.
We're very prolific, yes. There are, 80 denominations worldwide that claim Methodism or Wesley? Yeah.
All right, just one or two other things before we let you go, because we know you're busy. And there's a lot of stuff here, but this has been in the news lately in the sense of we are, I think, 70-ish or 70 years of full clergy rights for women.
Yeah.
I know you're not clergy, you're lay, but, in the news recently, my brother is a Southern Baptist preacher. And I'm a United Methodist preacher, and they've been in the news. It's been kind of like this whole thing about women in ministry and preaching, and we probably were not as far ahead as we could have been, but we are. I do know, like, the first female elder in the South Georgia Conference is a friend of mine, and the stories of the struggles, her entire ministry. Of where to be sent and where to go, and how churches, I guess 70 some odd years in, when it comes to equality with women in ministry, I mean, what's been done well? What's not been done well? I mean, is it finished, or is there more to come? What's your take on that? I'm just asking the questions. Please don't throw stones at me.
Definitely not finished. I think there are still major issues around pay equity between female and male ordained clergy persons. There's equity around appointments and the type of appointments. A lot of women are appointed to what we call kind of glass cliff churches, where it's the church is either going to thrive or die, and so you appoint a woman, and so if it dies, a woman did it. The whole glass cliff is a thing.
Glass cliff. That's interesting.
And so I think that we definitely still have places to work on. There are still also a lot of churches that will not accept a woman pastor. And so how do bishops and district superintendents work with congregations to where they see women as an equal religious authority to a man? And, when we go back, this is another kind of place and space where we lost that vileness. Because John Wesley, he was slow to come around to women being preachers, despite his mother essentially being a lay preacher. And it's not until the 1760s, 1770s where he really starts to see that the Spirit does fall equally, and begins issuing preaching licenses to women. And in 1787, Sarah Mallett is officially given a license by the Methodist Connection. And when you get over to the Methodists in America, over time, we kind of put women further and further back into the quiet part of the pews, right? We take them from being exhorters and class leaders and just kind of silence them a little bit more and a little bit more until post-Civil War, when they had enough and start really pushing for ordination rights and preaching licenses rights from the 1870s forward. And when you read the debates between the 1920s, so in the 1920s, women are granted local ordination rights, which is essentially kind of the same rights as a local pastor might have today, right? They could do the sacraments in the congregation that they were appointed to, but they could not vote at the annual conference. And so in 1920, between 1920 and 1956, when they're granted full clergy rights, the arguments are essentially like, we gave you what you wanted, right? Like,
you want
stop
more?
asking for
you want
more.
to vote now?
You want to vote? Yeah, we gave you sacramental authority within your little context, and yeah, I think it's our Wesleyan impulse and our Wesleyan duty to always keep pushing the boundary to ensure that equal access means equal access and equitable access. So yes, women should have wanted the vote at annual conference. And I think that if we look at our current system, there are still a lot of inequities within it. So Not only should we fight for women's rights and equal appointments and help our congregations find ways to accept a woman pastor, but we should do that for cross-cultural appointments. We should be doing that for queer appointments. We should find ways to where people acknowledge that the Spirit of God is in all of us. And some of us have that special set apartness to be part of the ordained ministry.
All right, 2 last questions and I'll let you go. One is, what is one piece of Methodist history you wish every person listening to this podcast knew?
And the weirder, the better. Just gonna put
One
that in
piece.
One piece of Methodist history you wish every person listening to this podcast knew.
Okay, I'll do this one. This one is less cheeky, but it's important. So going back to Methodist women, right? If Methodist women get together and determine to do something, they're going to do it. So the temperance women in the early 20th century sold temperance packets for a nickel a piece. And they did this because they wanted to buy a plot of land on the Washington Mall. And they were successful. They sold temperance packets and purchased a plot of land and built a building that is now the United Methodist Building in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. And when it was built, and to this day, it is the only non-governmental building to sit on the Washington Mall.
Come on.
And that shows, right, that kind of shows multiple things, right? Like it shows that rise of our respectability, that we literally sit next door to the Supreme Court and across from Capitol Hill. So it shows that place of prominence, and it shows that theological urge to be involved in social conversations, to ensure and hold accountable the people who are in power. So I that's one of my favorite facts, is that we are the only non-governmental building on Capitol Hill. We're in the Washington Mall to this day.
And that thing is worth a lot of money, too.
I'm sure it's worth obscene amounts of money, but we will never sell it.
No, probably. All right, last one.
I will.
Last one. In 100 years, the Methodist historian opens up the archives of a denomination. What do you hope she finds, and what do you fear she will find?
Oh man. Okay. I hope that she finds that the Methodists of the 2020s, right, kind of in this COVID pandemic, disaffiliation, post-disaffiliation, identity formation space, like in this decade that is the 2020s, that she finds that it is one of those decades of pivotal, fundamental change. And I say that because when you look at our past, every time a different denomination was formed off of the main branch of the Methodist Episcopal Church, the main branch, that Methodist Episcopal Church, didn't change because it didn't want to lose more members. It wanted to maintain its status, even if that was status quo. We've been through, as you've mentioned earlier, right, we've lost 20% of our congregations in the last 6 years, 6 to 10 years. And I'm getting inklings, I don't want to jinx us, that there is finally conversations happening around identity, around heritage and who we are, and what that means for the type of witness we have in the world today. And I see that not only through the changes that were made at the 2024 General Conference, where we actually did change language by removing language, but also through our attempts to become a more equitable structure through regionalization, and through things like the new vision statement that the Connectional Table and the Council of Bishops have put out, through the leadership gathering that's coming up in October, where, we're not legislating. We are getting together and dreaming about the church that could and can be. And so doing this work of who are we, and like how do we take what we've been through and use it to shape a new people called United Methodist. So I really hope that's what she finds in 100 years. What I fear that she finds is the opposite of that, that we had another really great moment to kind of rethink about who we are and figure out who we want to be as United Methodists in this world. And we got really tired of talking about it and kind of gave up, which is what's happened previously.
Yeah, that's a good word.
So no pressure.
My feel has been that we've been so like turned inward, licking our wounds, and kind of just playing it safe. I guess recuperating, like trying to catch our breath. And I'm just kind of like, I don't think every church has done that. I think a lot of churches are, but I'm not just talking about churches. I'm talking about conferences and other places as well, with a sense of vision and excitement about moving into the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Ashley Boggan, thank you for being with us today.
You're great.
Thank you all. This was really fun.
It was fun. And you know what? I love history.
You come and talk I'm sure, at annual conferences?
I do. I spoke at 8 this past season.
She was at ours
When?
maybe like 2 years ago or 3.
Can you come back?
You came to
Which
Texas
conference?
Texas
Texas
conference.
Annual Conference.
Yeah,
Yeah,
with Cynthia Harvey.
Oh,
You were
yeah,
here
yeah.
with a guy maybe 2 years ago or 3. I don't remember. It was sometime.
I think it was.
A couple of years ago.
I've done.
See, this is
And
what
then
history is so long for us. We just say a couple of years ago, a few years ago.
Yeah, I think it was 2023 or 2024. It was one of those two. Yeah.
Okay.
The great years. Well, thank you for being with us so much. And
Thanks
I
so much.
really appreciate your
Thank you.
time.
Gift.
And looking forward to seeing you soon and hearing more about all the work you're doing. Hey, before you go, where can listeners find books from you, or where can they find resources from archives and histories and things like that if they want to learn more?
Or your
You mentioned the Crown, the conferencing curriculum. Where do people
Yes.
go?
So the easiest place to find everything that Archives and History is putting out there is resourceumc.org/archives and history. You can also follow us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram at UMC_history. And any of my books, I always encourage people to purchase through Cokesbury.
All right. We'll make sure Jeff, our producer, puts all that in the show notes and everything so people have access to it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank y'all. Have a good one.
Thank
Wonderful
you very much.
day.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Do you feel educated now?
I like to. I mean, you think you're going to get some like librarian, and then you get like this amazing intellect that has like the social heartbeat. It makes me excited to be Methodist.
I've heard her speak before. That's why I was reached out to her, because I've heard her, and I saw she was doing some things and had these topics going on. There's a lot of projects she's working on. She writes and teaches and does a lot of stuff too. But I heard her when she was here a couple of years ago, and I thought, she's interesting for the historian, because I'm like you. I thought it was going to be. You know, the beaded
the Dewey
glasses
Decimal
on,
System.
Yeah, exactly. Like the old librarian from your middle school, your high school, right? But
Archives.
that was good.
Feel
Well,
like-
Matt, it's good to be back.
Oh,
Make
it's great to
sure
see
if you are listening that you like, subscribe, and share. We've got some differing. We had one come out last week or no?
No, it starts this week.
We start this week. This one starts this week. So we've got a couple that are loaded and ready to go that we did in the summer. I've got one. You've got one. But maybe next week, in the next couple weeks, we got some great guests coming up that we've got lined up. A lot of folks who have been a lot of Methodists, so we kind of revisiting our tribe a little bit here and hearing some of the projects they're working on, the books they're writing. So I think that'll be interesting as well. Anything else, Jeff, for the good of the order?
Great.
I think that's it. You have anything else?
No, I'm good.
Are you glad to be back?
I love it.
Did you have a good summer?
I did. Had a
All right,
really
well, we're
good
not going to go through that today
No, we'll
because
do
we
it
don't have
another
enough time. You know what? Give us a couple of weeks and we'll just we'll talk about all
Chew
the
the fat.
things we did this summer. Well, I'm John Stevens.
I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.